At just 54 years old, the beloved actor Malcolm-Jamal Warner passed away suddenly drowned while swimming off the coast of Costa Rica. The announcement came from his publicist, who confirmed the heartbreaking news through a statement released to the press. Social media erupted. Within minutes, tributes poured in from fans, celebrities, and longtime friends. Former co-stars from The Cosby Show posted tearful messages, while musicians, activists, and cultural icons expressed deep sorrow over the loss of a man who had given so much, often in silence. But what the public didn't know, not yet, was the astonishing truth about what Malcolm left behind. In the hours and days that followed his death, Warner's family began sifting through the layers of his life. They discovered a secret fortune, not just in wealth, but in wisdom, love, recordings, writings, and an intricately built empire that almost no one outside his closest circle knew existed. Hidden properties, unpublished poetry, private donations to causes dear to his heart, each detail peeling back another layer of a man the world thought they already knew. And when the full extent of his legacy was revealed, it moved his family to tears. This video tells the full story. We'll go back to the very beginning, from his childhood in New Jersey to the height of The Cosby Show's global success. We'll revisit the rise and fall of fame, the personal demons he wrestled with in private. You'll hear about the man behind the role of Theo Huxtable, the artist, the father, and the silent philanthropist. So stay with us, because what we found in the life of Malcolm-Jamal Warner will change the way you remember him forever. Malcolm-Jamal Warner was born on August 18, 1970, in Jersey City, New Jersey, though his path would eventually take him far from the East Coast streets of his youth. Raised by a single mother, Pamela Warner, Malcolm's early life was molded by the realities of financial struggle, personal sacrifice, and the steady determination of a black woman determined to give her son every opportunity she never had. Pamela wasn't just a mother, she was his first teacher, his first manager, his protector, and eventually, his most trusted advisor. She noticed early that Malcolm had something different about him. Whether it was the way he observed the world or how naturally he could mimic voices and tell stories, there was a rhythm in him, a creative pulse she could feel. From the time he could speak, Malcolm entertained. He would reenact scenes from television, invent his own characters, and perform dramatic readings in front of family and neighbors. That talent, paired with his mother's tireless support, became the foundation for what would become an extraordinary life. When Malcolm was around 9 years old, Pamela enrolled him in acting classes. She saw it not just as a hobby, but a possible path. The young boy embraced the training with discipline and joy. He didn't just want to act, he wanted to understand the work. He began studying the performances of his heroes, memorizing lines from Sidney Poitier, analyzing comedic timing from Richard Pryor, and absorbing the magnetic charm of Denzel Washington. By the age of 12, Malcolm was booking roles in small commercials and working the audition circuit in Los Angeles. The city was overwhelming, but Malcolm never flinched. He knew exactly what he wanted. And in 1984, at just 14 years old, he landed the role that would define a generation and change the course of his life forever. He was cast as Theo Huxtable, the teenage son of Cliff and Claire on NBC's groundbreaking sitcom, The Cosby Show. When The Cosby Show first aired on September 20, 1984, it was more than just another primetime sitcom, it was a cultural reset. At a time when black families were either marginalized or poorly represented on television, the Huxtables broke the mold. Cliff Huxtable was a doctor. Claire Huxtable was a lawyer. Their children were smart, funny, and complex. And in the middle of it all stood Theo, the relatable, rebellious, big-hearted son, played by Malcolm-Jamal Warner. From the very first episode, Warner lit up the screen. There was something effortlessly cool about Theo. He wasn't a caricature of black youth. He was thoughtful, flawed, aspirational, and grounded. He made mistakes, challenged authority, dealt with insecurities, and learned life lessons along the way. And through Malcolm's performance, Theo Huxtable became not just a character, but a symbol for young black men across America and the world. Malcolm wasn't playing Theo. In many ways, he was Theo, at least in spirit. But behind the scenes, the responsibility of carrying that kind of cultural weight on his teenage shoulders was immense. He knew the power of representation. He also knew how rare it was. As a young black actor in Hollywood, he was aware that any wrong move, on screen or off, could be his last. So, Malcolm stayed focused. While other teen stars fell into the common traps of fame, drugs, egos, rebellion, he kept a low profile. He stayed grounded. He listened. Throughout the show's run, Malcolm forged strong bonds with the cast, especially with Bill Cosby, who mentored him both as an actor and a budding director. But in later years, as Cosby's legal controversies surfaced and tarnished the legacy of the show, Malcolm would find himself in a painful position. He had to reconcile his gratitude for the opportunity with his disappointment in the man who gave it to him. Publicly, Malcolm chose his words carefully. He never defended Cosby's alleged actions, but he also never disrespected the people who gave him his first real family on screen. He spoke often about the importance of separating the show's cultural value from the man at its center. To Malcolm, The Cosby Show wasn't about one person. It was about an entire generation of black excellence being displayed with dignity, humor, and heart. By the time the show ended in 1992, Malcolm-Jamal Warner had become one of the most recognized and respected young black actors in America. He had fame. He had money. But most importantly, he had purpose. And it was only the beginning. In the shadow of his acting career, Malcolm-Jamal Warner was quietly building a creative world few people ever truly saw. He had always felt the limits of television acting. It was structured, scripted, and cleanly packaged for mass consumption. But Malcolm's soul pulsed in rhythm, metaphor, and melody. In his early 20s, as the limelight of The Cosby Show faded, he sought new ways to speak. Poetry for him wasn't performance, it was confession. He began performing at underground venues in Los Angeles, first anonymously, then as himself. Standing under dim lights in back-alley clubs or cafes that smelled of coffee and dreams, Malcolm delivered pieces that stunned listeners. His words were jazz riffs. His themes were vulnerability, race, masculinity, and longing. There were no laugh tracks here. No stage directions. Just truth. By the mid-1990s, he was a fixture in the spoken word circuit. He performed at the Nuyorican Poets Cafe in New York and toured college campuses where young students of color clung to his every word. He was no longer Theo, he was a prophet of inner reflection. Poetry wasn't all. Malcolm was also becoming a musician in his own right. He learned bass guitar, studied jazz theory, and developed a sound that blended funk, jazz, soul, and spoken word. His first music project, the miles-long mixtape, released independently in 2003, surprised critics. It wasn't polished pop. It was raw, experimental, and deeply personal. He wasn't trying to break the Billboard charts. He was documenting his truth in sound. Later, with Selfless in 2015, Warner created what some would later call his soul map. It was a project filled with layered instrumentation, haunting poetry, and collaborations with fellow musicians who were equally overlooked by the mainstream. Warner didn't just play music, he felt it in his bones. But perhaps most surprising to fans was his emergence as a director. He directed several episodes of The Cosby Show in its later seasons, a rare feat for such a young actor. From there, he quietly built a resume as a skilled television director. Over the years, he directed episodes of Malcolm and Eddie, Read Between the Lines, The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, and even music videos for independent artists he believed in. To Warner, directing was another form of storytelling, just with a wider canvas. He believed in centering black narratives not as trauma porn, but as human, beautiful, nuanced explorations of survival, love, and resilience. He rarely boasted about these pursuits. Most fans never even knew. But behind the scenes, a body of creative work was forming. One that would, after his death, be uncovered in hard drives, handwritten notebooks, and audio reels stored in climate-controlled vaults across 3 states. And when his family opened those archives, they cried. Not because they didn't know he was gifted, but because they hadn't realized how much of himself he'd kept quietly sacred. If Malcolm-Jamal Warner was quiet about his art, he was even more guarded about his personal life. Unlike many of his peers, he never chased headlines. He was rarely seen in tabloids. He didn't attend red carpet events unless required. He dated, but discreetly. He loved deeply, but rarely publicly. In an industry obsessed with scandal and spectacle, Warner lived almost like a monk in comparison. That wasn't by accident. He had seen firsthand how destructive celebrity could be, how the hunger for exposure could eat away at the soul. So he protected his inner circle with steel. Few outside his closest friends even knew where he lived. He once said in a rare interview, "I don't hide my life because I'm afraid. I hide it because it's mine." Throughout his adult life, Warner had a few high-profile relationships. One of the most well-known was with actress Michelle Thomas, his Cosby Show co-star. Their relationship was filled with youthful joy and artistic chemistry. But tragedy struck when Michelle died of cancer in 1998 at just 30 years old. Malcolm was at her bedside. He was devastated, and he never spoke publicly about the pain again. Friends later revealed that her death changed him. He grew quieter, more introspective. He began writing more poetry, retreating from public relationships. He dated other women, some actresses, some not, but he kept those stories sealed. In the early 2010s, he reportedly married in private. No public announcement. No wedding photos. Just a quiet ceremony in an undisclosed location. Even after his death, the identity of his spouse was shielded from media. Sources close to him claimed that he had a daughter, born in 2015, whom he fiercely protected from paparazzi. No photos of her were ever made public. He referred to her as his moon, and she became the center of his world. In private journals later discovered by his family, he wrote pages upon pages of letters addressed to her. Some were silly, filled with rhymes and jokes. Others were profound, meditations on love, race, resilience, and fatherhood. They read like a guidebook from a father preparing his child to walk through the world without him. Perhaps the most haunting line was scribbled in a journal entry dated May 2025, just 2 months before his death. "When the waves take me, tell her the ocean is not her enemy. Tell her I chose the sea not to leave, but to become part of the rhythm." The pain of those words would echo through his family's hearts in the weeks following his drowning off the Costa Rican coast. But they also found solace in knowing this: Malcolm had loved, deeply, protectively, beautifully. Even if the world never saw it. When Malcolm-Jamal Warner died on July 20, 2025, many assumed he left behind a modest estate. He wasn't flashy. He didn't own a fleet of luxury cars. He didn't live in a Beverly Hills mansion. He wore simple clothes, lived quietly, and never flaunted wealth. But appearances, as always, were deceiving. In the weeks following his death, Warner's legal team began organizing his estate. What they found stunned even those closest to him. He was worth over $48 million. Not because he made it overnight, but because he'd planned, patiently, privately, for decades. The foundation of his fortune came from his years on The Cosby Show. Unlike many actors, Malcolm had a mother who negotiated a smart contract early on. He received residuals from syndication, and when the show went global, so did the money. Even after the show's popularity declined due to controversy surrounding Bill Cosby, international networks and streaming platforms continued to license episodes, generating millions in residuals over time. But Warner didn't spend that money recklessly. He invested. In his early 30s, he began buying real estate across Los Angeles, Atlanta, Houston, and later, Costa Rica. He didn't flip homes or follow trends. He bought properties in up-and-coming neighborhoods, renovated them quietly, and either rented or held them. Over 25 years, he accumulated 16 properties across 4 countries. He also owned a small production company, which licensed independent films, short-form documentaries, and music content. It wasn't a major studio, but it was profitable. He partnered with underrepresented Black filmmakers, helping them distribute content digitally through platforms like Tubi, Netflix, and Hulu. He had stock investments in tech and green energy companies, a trust fund set up for his daughter, and a private publishing deal that generated income from his music and poetry books. None of it was public. There were no Instagram posts bragging about passive income. There were no interviews boasting about net worth. But when the family lawyers opened the folders, the files, the vaults, the passcodes, the numbers spoke for themselves. The quietest man in the room had become a silent millionaire. And he had done it with grace, intelligence, and humility. His daughter inherited the majority of the estate, including a Costa Rican beach house, a music studio in Atlanta, and an unreleased memoir stored in encrypted format. His family, gathered in a private reading of his will, couldn't stop the tears. It wasn't the money that moved them, it was the intention behind it. What made Malcolm-Jamal Warner's fortune truly remarkable wasn't its size. It was what he did with it. Throughout his adult life, Warner gave generously, but always in secret. He never put his name on buildings. He never staged press conferences or ribbon cuttings. Yet, in the months after his passing, dozens of nonprofit organizations came forward to share what they'd hidden out of respect. Malcolm had been their benefactor all along. He donated hundreds of thousands of dollars to arts programs in inner-city schools, funding music and theater departments that would have been shut down otherwise. He provided scholarships to students attending HBCUs under anonymous foundations. He funded mental health clinics for young Black men. He paid rent for struggling artists. He bought studio time for musicians trying to record their first albums. In 2019, he secretly founded the Crescent Initiative, a nonprofit disguised as a general education trust, which in reality mentored young poets, writers, and directors of color. The initiative operated through community centers in New Jersey, Chicago, and Oakland, helping hundreds of young creatives find their voice. He also wrote letters, handwritten encouragements to young artists he admired but had never met. Some of those letters were discovered framed in their recipients' homes after his death. In every case, he gave without asking for anything in return. And when his family uncovered the full list of donations, the tears flowed again. Not because they didn't know he was generous, but because they hadn't realized how far that generosity had reached. One of the final entries in his private journal read, "Legacy is not what you leave behind for the world. It's what you quietly leave inside the people you touched, without them even knowing." In the final months of his life, Malcolm-Jamal Warner appeared content to the outside world. A man who had shaped his journey with grace, intention, and quiet dignity. But behind closed doors, those who knew him best sensed an unspoken restlessness, a quiet unraveling that had been building in silence. He had retreated more deeply into solitude during the early part of 2025, spending most of his time at his secluded property near Santa Teresa, Costa Rica. Nestled between rainforest and sea, the home was modest, with open-air spaces, exposed wood beams, a writing room filled with books and handwritten journals, and a small recording studio overlooking the waves. He called it the Silence House. To neighbors, he was just a polite, quiet American who occasionally helped locals repair storm-damaged roofs or funded medical treatments without fanfare. He surfed. He hiked. He read for hours in a hammock. At night, he wrote by candlelight or recorded music with headphones on. He didn't post online. He didn't invite many people over. But he smiled. He was peaceful. Or so it seemed. But beneath that quiet exterior, Malcolm had begun reflecting on mortality. He had long been philosophical about death, and in the final entries of his journal, his writing took on a prophetic tone. "Everything I've built is no good unless it lives beyond me. The time has come to give it away. To leave something rooted." He was tired, not in body but in soul. His lifelong mission of staying true to himself had worn him in ways that even his music couldn't heal. Friends noted his voice on phone calls sounded softer, his words more weighted. He spoke of transitions, of letting go. He even asked his lawyer to update parts of his will in early July, less than 3 weeks before he died. On the morning of July 20, 2025, he awoke early, made his usual green tea, and meditated as he always did. A nearby fisherman said he saw Malcolm walking barefoot down the beach. He waved politely before disappearing into the surf. What happened next is still a mystery. The tide was high. The current was strong. And Malcolm, a strong swimmer, never returned. His body was discovered hours later by local authorities, gently washed against a rock inlet several miles north of where he entered the sea. The autopsy confirmed the cause of death, accidental drowning. There was no sign of trauma, no substance in his system. The ocean had simply claimed him. And just like that, the world lost a man it thought it knew, but was only beginning to truly understand. It took less than a day for word of Malcolm's death to reach Hollywood. But it would take weeks before anyone could comprehend the magnitude of what he left behind. His death sparked tributes, memorials, and a surge of nostalgia. The Cosby Show episodes began trending again. Old interviews resurfaced. Fans flooded social media with memories, quotes, and artwork. But what none of them knew, not even those closest to him, was that Malcolm had been preparing for this moment for years. His lawyer had been entrusted with a master document titled simply, "In the Event of My Peace." It was Malcolm's final roadmap, a detailed set of instructions for how to handle everything he'd left behind. Property deeds. Intellectual property rights. Trust allocations. Charitable disbursements. And most mysteriously, keys to vaults and storage facilities in California, Georgia, and Costa Rica. Inside those vaults was something extraordinary. There were recordings, more than 40 hours of unreleased music, poetry albums, and experimental jazz sessions. There were manuscripts, a nearly completed memoir, children's stories for his daughter, and dozens of personal essays addressed to the Black community. There were video diaries, shot over a span of 10 years, where Malcolm spoke into the lens not to perform, but to preserve his thoughts. His emotions. His truths. There were paintings, too, abstract works he never showed publicly. Each canvas signed only with the initials MJW, and accompanied by journal pages explaining their meaning. And then there was the money. Over $48 million in assets, real estate across 3 countries, royalty accounts for music, streaming and syndication, private investments in eco-resorts, technology startups, and a silent ownership stake in an education software firm that had tripled in value over the past 5 years. He had set up multiple trusts, including a generational trust for his daughter that ensured she would receive not just wealth, but access to his full creative archive, including the right to publish, distribute, or display any of his unreleased work. There was even a written letter enclosed in a black envelope, addressed to her, simply titled, "For When You're Ready." It was the kind of fortune most people dream of. But what made it priceless wasn't the money, it was the meaning behind it. Malcolm had built it carefully, privately, and with purpose. Every dollar had a direction. Every song had a message. Every decision, even in silence, was an act of legacy. When his family began opening the vaults, one after the other, they found themselves weeping. Not for the loss of his life, but for the beauty of how intentionally he had prepared for his absence. Malcolm-Jamal Warner's family knew he was private. They knew he was protective of his space. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't have imagined, was the scale of his hidden world. In the days following his funeral, held in Costa Rica per his wishes with only a dozen attendees, his mother Pamela and sister Sharon flew to Atlanta to meet with Julian Clark. What unfolded over the next several hours would leave them speechless. Julian, with careful hands, laid out Malcolm's estate in full. He explained the royalties, the properties, the trusts, and the messages Malcolm had written. Each section of the plan included videos recorded by Malcolm himself, speaking softly and directly to his loved ones. "Mom," one video began, his voice cracking slightly, "everything I ever did, I did because you believed in me first. You taught me how to be brave quietly. I hope I made you proud." Pamela broke down sobbing. To Sharon, he left letters and a music reel titled "For My Sister's Silence," a private jazz piece he composed during the pandemic when they hadn't seen each other for nearly a year. To his daughter, there were volumes, journals, lullabies, handwritten lullabies, and a sealed USB labeled "Open on your 18th birthday." But perhaps the most emotional revelation came from the letters he left to extended family, nieces, nephews, old friends, and the people he supported anonymously. Many had no idea it was Malcolm who had paid for their surgeries, rent, or school tuition. And now, reading his words, they understood the depth of his quiet love. Pamela Warner later said in a private interview, "You think you know your child. But then the world shows you what they became when no one was looking. And you cry, not from sadness but from awe." They cried for the years he spent crafting a life of service behind the veil. They cried because he had planned it all so carefully, so selflessly, and never once asked for recognition. They cried because they were proud. And in their tears, something beautiful was born: understanding. Before you go, if this story moved you the way it moved us, if you felt the weight of Malcolm-Jamal Warner's quiet legacy, his unspoken brilliance, and the love he left behind, don't forget to hit that like button. Like this video if you believe true legacy lives in how we treat others when no one's watching. Subscribe to our channel for more video that uncover the truth behind the headlines. Leave a comment below. What part of Malcolm's story touched you the most? Thank you for watching. Rest in peace, Malcolm-Jamal Warner.